Alright, good morning folks. Today we're doing a little bit of an impromptu stream because I would like to finish up the work on these Menhirs. That way the next time we do the main stream we can just get right into it. In between the streams I applied Agrax Earthshade to the base of these models. Before you could see they were quite bright, but now they've been dulled down and are ready for us to put some highlights on them. Bring them back up a little bit. You can see our reference image in the bottom right of the screen there, and so that is what we're going to be working with and what we're working towards, but we are going to have a little bit more of an OSL lighting effect on the bottom of these. So without further ado, we'll get started here with our trusty makeup brush from the dollar store. I do have my Tactical Latte here, so go ahead and take a sip of that just to get us going. And with some fresh water, we're going to start putting some highlights on these. What we're going to do first here is come in with the overall effect that we want on these. So we're going to take a little bit of Basculus Brown. This is an Army Painter paint. And we're going to get a little bit on our palette. We're going to be using our makeup brush as a dry brush. So we don't want too much. There we go. Too much water with it. But we do want some. So I'm just going to moisten my brush here. Wipe some of that out. This is all very dry. So this is sat for a few days here. We're going to pick up some of this Basculus Brown. I'm going to get most of it out. I'm going to test this on the back of my thumb. That's still too much. There we go. Alright, and we're going to start highlighting up. So I'm just going to be making some swirling motions here on top of this. And we're just going to continue these swirling motions across the top of each one of them. Because what we're doing is we're setting up the highlights over the whole thing here, but in a moment we're going to be working with doing the OSL highlight that comes from the lightning strike that's on it. Alright, I really want to get a lot in the brush this time. It looks like I'm getting too much of it out, and so I do want, that's a little too much there. There we go. So I do want to see it on the model. I just don't want there to be a crazy amount. There we go. Yep, finding just the right mix is sometimes a little difficult. But you can see it just very start to appear. And this is going to be real subtle at first, just like all of our other dry brushing. And then we'll build up the layers as we go. Just making those small circular motions, very slowly adding our paint. The slower we go, the more control we have. So we want to make sure that we're only getting paint where we want it and in the amount that we want it in. You can see this is nice and hard too. This really sat for quite a few days. If you're a little too fast, these ridges will not hold their shape. So when you come over them with a stiff dry brush like this, they'll start to deform, and then you'll get kind of some strange effects going on. Alright, get most of that out. Yep, there we go. I'm just slowly building up this Basculus Brown on here. And this color is chosen just to match the rest of my Necrons. This is generally how I will do it. So whenever you're basing your models, you would do whatever it is you do to make your models match. So just getting in there, building up that color. Alright, that is definitely a good start there. And you can see, I'm going to bring these closer, you can definitely see the difference between the two. One on the left has the Basilisk brown, the one on the right does not. That Agrax Earthshade actually has quite a bit of brown red in it, so it's very much a warm color. There we go. So we're going to go ahead and make the other one look the same. So same technique. We're just going to pull some Basilisk brown onto the palette. No additional water for this one. We're going to see where we go. I think I had just a tad too much water in the first time because I was losing almost all the paint off of my brush. So we're going to get it in there. Go ahead and get most of that out. Again, test it. What I'm looking for on the back of my thumb is if I can see that brush stroke, like if I move the brush across my thumb and then it leaves visible strokes, I know there's too much paint because that brush stroke will then be visible in my model. And since I'm dry brushing here, I do not want that to be the case. So in case you're wondering what I'm looking for, I'm just looking to see that, one, there's not a ton of paint on my thumb, and two, I don't see the brush stroke itself. I don't see the individual hairs making lines on my thumb here. So still coming in just a little bit. You can see I tested after each time because that paint is drying out on my palette, and it's going to act differently over time. Many of these paints do have thinners and other things in them that have low vapor pressures. And so they tend to cause the paint to dry a little faster than maybe you would think it would. Alright, that's after one iteration all the way around. You can see it's no longer quite as warm as it once was. A little bit brighter. You can see those ridges quite a bit more. It doesn't quite match this other one because I went around the other one twice. So we're going to do the same thing here. I'm going to go around the edge of the model twice. Not really changing anything. We're just building up that color here so that we can see the texture that's on this. Going around trying to catch the edges of these ridges a little bit more, but I'm also then coming back making sure I do this swirling motion. That way I kind of catch everywhere that's not in the deep recesses, but I'm leaving all those deep recesses. Alright, so now we can see those look pretty much the same. A little bit darker over here. In fact, I'm actually going to look at them now and make any changes I need to. So this one needs a little bit more in this area. Inconsistencies are fine. I could definitely let this go. But because this is really kind of a color and shading thing, I do want to kind of keep this base layer very similar. And there we go. Yeah, we pulled that just right around. Now, I'm going to take a little bit of my Arid Earth, and I'm going to come in. Right now I'm just wiping this out of my brush. And so this is some Army Painter Arid Earth. It's just a pale off-white color. And I'm going to shake this up. I'm going to mute real quick while I put this on the spinner. Alright, we're going to get some of that on our palette. You can see where we had it the last time, right here. I'm just going to add it to the same place. All of that paint is nice and dry. And we're going to be pretty light with this. I don't want to go overboard. It's very easy to obliterate all of the good work that we've done before, and we don't want to do that. You can see here I'm also not adding much water here. Just the water that was left in my brush is going to be plenty for this for right now. If I need to, I'll add a little more. Grab some of that, knock most of it out, come here, and that's perfect. And so we're going to be very light with this. Yep, just hitting the very, very tips here. And in this case, I'm going to start moving from my light source out. And this is going to help sell the effect that we're going for in just a moment here. So we're going from the source out here, just being very, very gentle. All right. And now you can see the difference there with the two different highlights. I'm going to bring the same thing over here. I'm not going to pick up any more because, again, this is a very subtle highlight here. We're adding just to the very tallest parts. And we're already starting to go from the OSL source out. And this is going to help sell the effect for what we're about to do here. All right. So there we are. And no more of that is needed. That was just enough to really pick out those edges, bring out those bits. So now we're going to use a very similar technique to what we did on the rest of the veneer. We're going to paint this base in grayscale a bit coming out from where this lightning is striking, and we're going to pull this lightning strike area where the OSL effect should be occurring from it hitting the ground out a little bit across the base. We probably want to stay within that center area here, so the inner 50%, maybe every now and then a little bit coming out. We'll have a little bit wider arc in the front and a little bit thinner arc on the sides where the light will be blocked by this piece right here. So you can see this ball has a piece here blocking it on either side, and so less light will actually be able to get out from under there and hit the ground, and more light here. And we will remember, though, that the lightning is there, so that's going to be generating most of it. But we'll see if we can sell that very subtle effect here. To start this, the same thing we've always done. Take a little bit of Army Painter, matte black. We don't need much this time because we're really not going to be doing a whole lot with each one of these. This is a very small area. And our Army Painter, matte white. And we're going to pull them together and make kind of a middling gray color. Didn't add any water to this. The water that is in it is the latent water that is in the brush from me washing it out, and whatever was left after I had brushed it on my palette here, or on my paper. Alright, let's see what that looks like. So I got all of it out that time. I'm going to add a little more back in. Yeah, there we go. Alright, so we're going to come right around here. We're going to add this gray effect in here. Now this is going to be extremely subtle. It will be there, but very, very, very subtly. Yep, you can see it just forming right there, and I'm keeping this right to the center, but I am going right to the edge where this lightning strike hits, and then I'm just pulling out. Being very careful not to touch the lightning with this gray. Yep, and you can see it just coming right out right there. And so just to give you the difference, you can see that very subtle kind of burning effect that's occurring there, and it's not on the other one yet. I'm going to grab a little bit more of that gray. Again, most of these techniques are about just taking your time, making sure that you're getting the paint where you want it to be, and very slowly building up your colors. Yep. So we're going to get in here, going to make sure that gets on there, because we're going to come back over this with this Tezzeret Glow when we're done, and so we're going to bring it out. So this is good for that first layer here. Going to pick up some more gray, and we're going to go on to the next one, again in very subtle motions here, pulling this out. And we're keeping just to the center area here, right around where that lightning is at. Grab a little more. Whoop, grab some white there. We'll remix this in to keep that middling gray. There we go. All right. Here we are. It's okay if this is not a perfect circle. That's totally fine, because what we're going for, we're going to come back over here and touch this up just a little bit where I see them. There we go, because this is just our base layer for this effect here. Right, we're going to go ahead and wash our brush out, less to get the paint off of it, more just to add a little moisture to the brush. All right, going to get a sip. All right, now we're going to take this same gray, going to have a little more white into it. It's going to be a 3-part process. So we'll have this lighter gray here, a little bit greater step than I would normally make, but there's no reason to spend a ton of time building up, 5, 6, 7 layers here, when in truth it's a base. And in this particular base, this is just not the focus here. And so we don't want to take too much away from the veneer itself, but we definitely want to make sure we're kind of keeping on applying these techniques across the model. That way there's some consistency there. And this one I am going to pull back a little further. And there we go. And so for the most part, I am still trying to keep my directionality correct. I want to go from the source out. There we go. From the source out. Even bring this in just a little further here. It's much easier for these type of models. This is a really tall model. It's much easier for me to keep it braced against the table than to try and hold it up. That is going to be difficult for me to keep it in the frame appropriately, but this is pretty good. All right, let's take a look here at what we have. Yeah, we're looking pretty good right there. You can actually really see the difference between this arid earth, which has some yellow and brown in it, from this just absolutely devoid of color gray here. And I think that really helps with this effect to really add some visual interest. All right, we're going to take a good bit more of our white, bring it into the gray, and then we're going to make a lighter gray here. So this is going to be our third and final step change before we take it all the way up with a little bit of pure white in a moment. So we're going to get almost all of this out. Again, we're just going to go from the source out, being very careful here not to obliterate all of the good work that's been done before. Yep. So we're going from the source out. And this is just a really great way of creating some nice volumes on your model, something with some visual interest here for people to look at. Yep. Now you can see these two, the difference as we're moving up. One on the left has the brightest gray, one on the right does not yet. So I'm not going to add, actually nope, I am going to come over here and grab a little more. Wipe that out so we don't overdo it, and go from the source out. Source out. It's okay if we pull this a little bit across, because there is light that's going to splash a little further off. Alrighty. Here we go. So now we have this here, and we're going to do our final here, which is going to be a little bit of pure white, which I am going to add back to my palette. Just cleaning out the brush here. All right. We have our matte white here in the corner. I'm going to allow the amount of water that is in the brush here to just be the amount of water that I have for it. Gotta be careful with these matte whites. Anybody's, it doesn't matter who you're using. They can look grainy if you're not adding any water to them. You start to see kind of the pigments of them. All right, get some more of that out. All right, very little of that. And now we're gonna save this just for these areas here. So remember I said there's gonna be less light here. This is one of the ways we're gonna show that. Is we're going to take the two arcs, and this is very subtle, but we're going to take the two arcs and have the light come out just a little further with this final highlight here from the center than it does the other side. So we're going to see this arc connecting the line here, right with the ball. We're going to come straight down and then work our way out. This is like a 35-degree angle or so. And we'll pull that very subtly up to the front. Then again, skipping this little area, because you can see it's got that. And we're going to do the same here with this pure white. But very little of that. We don't want to go overboard. It'd be very easy to, again, kind of obliterate a lot of the good work that we did. When you're layering these paints on, that's always the challenge, to add something extra to it without taking away. All right, now we have these on, and these layers do dry almost instantly. There's not really any reason for me to bust out the hair dryer here. Let's see what we got going on. All right. So we're going to grab some of our technical here, this Tezzeret Glow. As I talked about in the last stream, this is a transparent paint. You can see it settles really, really hard, and this particular bottle is almost done. So I'm going to go ahead and mute up, and then I'm going to stick this on the mixer. One moment. All right. So I'm going to grab some of this, get it onto the palette. All right, we don't need a ton this time because we're just going to be adding this feature down here. I have so much of it in the brush, I am going to come over to my water, go ahead and remove that so I can be a little bit more controlled. And so what this is a green paint with a fluorescent yellow dye in it. It is very, very aggressive, and so we have to be really careful with how we work with it. We're going to get that. We're going to knock most of that out. There's a lot of water still in that, so I'm going to squeeze this brush here. There we go. Get a lot more out. All right, that's feeling a bit better. Grab some of our paint here. There we go. Yep. All right, we're going to come back of the thumb. See, I don't see anything, but you can see if I do this, it starts to put that dye on my thumb, which is what I'm looking for. All right, we want very, very little. And now we're going to come here, and we're going to start getting that effect in. So just a touch of dye, and we're going to skip this arc here. So this is a very subtle effect, just seeing that OSL come in. And I keep saying OSL, that is object source lighting. And the object here is this lightning. Is our source. So we're going to come out here. We're going to have just a tad come in these corners. But then we're going to be skipping that area right there. So we'll have just a little bit, but then that light right there will be a lot less. So this will just come forward. We'll pull it right to the edge there. So now you can see the difference here. The one on the right has had the additional dye added from the Tezzeret Glow, and the one on the left has not. It just has the burnt effect. And you know, you could decide you really like this burnt effect more than you like the object source lighting. And so you could just say, well, this is it damaging the soil here. And that would also be a really acceptable thing you could do. In this case, though, I'm going to go for the glow to be the same color, or the OSL effect on the ground to be the same color. And we're going to make it just a little inconsistent here. We're going to pull this here. It's going to stop here. Maybe it gets a little further over there. You can kind of Bob Ross this thing and say, well, I'm gonna pull a few more bits just to add visual interest here, because real life is messy. And all of these models try and mimic real life to one degree or another. So don't worry too much about that. Now this still has a little bit too much of the burnt effect for me, so I'm going to come in here. I'm going to get a little more of this on there. Let's see, I'm just going to take a look at both of these here. Yeah, I think that's kind of where I want it. Maybe a little more around at the edge here. A little more there. Yeah, there we are. All right. So I I'm going to come in with just a touch of white to this and add just a little bit more of that pure white back as a highlight, and then we're going to be done. And when we're done, what we do for these models, obviously you can do this however you like, but I like to add a nice black base to my models. So I'm just going to come in just on the very, very tippy tops of stuff and add just that little bit of white just back there. Yep, just a tad. So on the very tallest bits, I'm going to come back in. There we go, you can see that again. Same here. All right. And there we are. So these guys are done. So the last thing I'm going to do is paint the rims black. And that again just matches my army. And I feel like it gives the models a nice, clean, finished look. It also covers up any of the extra stuff you might have gotten along the edge. You can see there's some chips on there. There's some, you know, whatever happened to get on there while I was working on the rest of the model. All right, and for that we're going to use some matte black by Army Painter. Just going to get this on our palette. This is a paint that I am going to put a little bit of water on. I'm not going to use this brush though to apply my water, and I'm not going to go in there in the paint. So there's two waters here. This is the one I've been using for the fluorescent dye paint, and this is one that I've been using for not that paint. This way I don't have to immediately stand up, and I can keep my paint nice and clean of that fluorescent dye, because it does get into everything. Similar to your basing compounds, you'll want to be very careful how you wipe your brush out. And so we're just going to grab some of this water here, just a tad, and we're just looking for this to flow pretty smoothly, because this is a place we do not want to see any brush strokes at all. So for this, I'm just going to pick it up, and I'm going to very carefully apply a thin layer of black here to the edge. Now, putting this on camera does make this a little bit more challenging. Normally I would have this very close to my face, and I would have my arms very close to my body, which would give me a lot of really good control. But here, I have to hold it quite a bit further away so you guys can see it. But this is a nice smooth black going on. We're always going to do this in at least 2 layers, because it's very thin, and it's very thin so that we don't see the brush strokes here. And this paintbrush is actually quite good at this. It's a very soft brush, and so it's very easy to put a lot of paint down without getting the strokes visible, especially when it is properly thinned. That'll always be a theme here, is that properly thinning your paints will make your life quite a bit easier. It is one of the most difficult things about painting models, because it is kind of a moving target here, and depending on what it is you're trying to do, you want your paints thin to a certain level. It's very difficult for me also to show you this through a screen, through a camera. Alright. We're going to clean that out so I don't have black paint drying in my brush. And I am going to mute, because in this case I am going to cheat. I am going to use the hairdryer here just to get this going. So I'm going to mute, pull out the hairdryer, and I'll be right back. All right, that was a nice thin layer, so it dried very quickly. I'm going to come back in. I'm going to grab a little bit of extra water here with my other brush, get that on to my palette here. I'm going to pull that into the black here so I can have, again, some nice smooth paint. I'm going to mix that together. There we go. And now I'm not going to wipe any of that out, and I'm going to come and do the same thing. I'm just going to move the other one out of my way. I'm going to apply a final thin layer of paint here. So kind of a nice smooth layer. Now, one of the interesting things you may have noticed is this brush actually causes small bubbles to appear with this paint whenever you're trying to paint like this. That can be bad, but in this case, they seem to be popping. They're just kind of scary when you're putting them down. You can definitely see them, but they seem to pop as they dry, which is great, and I continuously go over them to kind of smooth them down. But it is worth noting that if you had something that was a very large smooth surface and you were using a brush that was damaged in this fashion, you would probably leave a few of those bubbles behind, giving you an interesting texture, to say the least. So one of the pitfalls, I think, of using something like this to paint your models. Possibly one of the arguments for, spending your money on a brush that is both decent and purpose-built, rather than taking challenge painting jobs. All right. I am going to grab just a tad bit of water here. I can see where I'm starting to get some brush strokes here, and I do not want to see that in my base. So there we go. Yep. Smooth that right down. All right. Okay, gonna go ahead and wipe my brush out. That's 2 layers of black paint here on the base. I am gonna go ahead and mute us up, and then I'm gonna dry it out, and then we are gonna call it good, and we'll do a final look over. All right, so that is our final paint here. Now, while I was doing this, I was thinking, and I remembered that a lot of my Necrons do have a couple of small pieces of flock on them, just enough to kind of insinuate that there was some plants around. And so what we're going to do, normally I would do this before, I painted the bases. But in this case, I'm actually going to come in here. These are actually by Citadel. These are the gray, not gray, but they're these brown tufts. They make a brown tuft and they make a green tuft. And in this case, we're going to use this brown tuft here because the grass is kind of dead. So I'm going to work one of these off. I really like these by Citadel because they have kind of a gel underneath them. It makes them conform to whatever it is you're putting them on a little better. But I'm going to add just a little bit of this. And before I'm completely done, I am going to put some OSL on this as well because it's the tallest thing now on the base of the model, and it'll definitely need that effect applied so that this doesn't look super strange and out of place, especially since the rest of the base has it so nicely applied to it. It would be very strange here. This stuff does tend to stick all on its own. I generally don't feel like I need to do too much more to it. So we'll add one more here, just to kind of cover up that seam that I can see. Yep, that's nice. And let's see, maybe one more over here on this side. Bring that in. Here we go. All right, so we've added that in, and that's all. I don't really need to glue those down. I am going to grab just a touch of this paint, so a touch of our Tezzeret Glow here, and I'm going to come in on the side that's facing it, and we're going to give it some of that glow. And again, I'm just kind of using a very similar dry brush technique, just pulling it across here, just enough to make sure I get the paint on. I don't want to overdo it though. There we go. Same thing over here. I'm going to grab that, and we're going to do this right here. And just coming on the side that's facing it, we're going to leave the other. Yep, there we are. There we are, dry brushing the grass. Okay, so now we have the little OSL effect applied to the grass as well. And with that, these Menhir are actually complete. We're totally done with them. So these are going to go up on the shelf, and they are going to sit and wait for the rest of the model to be done. I'm just going around checking all these little seams here. Sometimes I don't push them down all the way. There we go. Yeah. And this is that final touch moment here. And this is just going over one of these ridges, which I'm actually going to crush down. There we go. I do want those to be fully seated, though. If they're not, they will tend to work their way up and off whenever we transport them. So whenever they're being transported around, they'll tend to start popping off. All right. And with that, the Menhir are completed. So these guys are going to move up to the shelf. I'll get some pictures of these up on our social media so you can see them in greater detail. So now we're going to move over to what we started work on before. And here I'm going to move the camera a bit. So here is the throne for the Silent King. And you can see these two pieces of blackstone are ones that we had worked on before. And I'm going to take a look over here at my reference model. And just looking at the model, it looks like there is this, and the only other piece of blackstone is actually going to be on his staff, which we will do at a different time. So we're going to work on this blackstone now. In the same technique that we used for the Menhirs, we're going to layer on our greens and blues, and then we're going to highlight them up with that same arid earth in the end. So let's go ahead and get started. In this case, I'm going to clean out my brush really well, because again, I had been working with that paint that has the fluorescent dye in it, and I do not want my blackstone to have fluorescent dye on it. So I am going to wash out and get fresh water, and then I'm going to be right back. All right, here we are with fresh water, and we're going to start by putting our greens on. In this case, we're going to start with Goblin Green. And we're just going to move our palette around and make it a little easier for me to get onto. Let's see where you guys are seeing it. Here? Yep, all right. So you'll see right in there. And I'm just shaking this up. It was shook 2 days ago, but you know what? I'm going to go ahead and put it back on. All right. Just set that up really quick. It doesn't need too much. All right. Going to get our Goblin Green in there. Very classic color, but this one's done by Army Painter. If you remember all the bases on models from the 90s, this is what everyone used to put on their models, because oftentimes the play surface was going to be a piece of green felt. So that green felt was kind of that color. And so actually, we need to desaturate this a bit. So we're going to add some black into it as well. So that we're going to have this desaturated goblin green here. And not quite equal parts, but we are going to use a bit of black into it. Alright. Yep, yeah, here we go. So we're going to be making this dark green color. And this dark green, it's kind of muddy green almost, is what's going to go over the whole thing, just like we did last time. And this is going to kind of be our base. I'm going to put a little more of this black in. I do want it to be a bit darker. There we go. Alright, I'm going to squeeze that out there. And I'm going to wash out my brush. That's way too much paint. Let's get that out there. And then in a moment we'll probably use this again, but less saturated. Now, this technique probably won't be identical to the one that we did last time, partially because I don't remember, but also partially because this is in a little bit different position on the model. And I want them to be very similar, but they do not have to be perfectly the same. If you were wanting them to be perfectly the same, you would need to write down what you're doing. And for commission models, I do that because I want them to be exact matches. And we're going to test this here. That's a little too much water. It's a little too much water. So let's go in again. We're just looking for the consistency where it leaves paint but not brush strokes. Alright, here we go. So we have it now. We're going to start at the bottom here. And this is going to be a very subtle here. And we're doing the same thing. I'm going to brace this with the back of my finger here. So it does not pop this off the model, which would be very unfortunate. And I'm going to do my best not to touch this steel. So I'm going to go very slow and very methodical here to make sure I'm hitting only the black stone here. Because if I can, I would love to not have to repaint this area of the model. I would like to be able just to roll with it and keep it the steel color. And so this is going to be really, really subtle at first, just like all the other times. You do not want to see a ton of paint on the model here. Making sure to get all the way up to the edge and the back. Most people will not see this area, but I am a completionist when it comes to this kind of thing. So if I have the time, and I do, in this particular case, that's what I'm going to do. So I'm bringing this color all the way up to the edge. And so now you can see when you're looking at it, the difference between the two sides. This actually is pretty nice for that. And we're just going to go in and get some more of our desaturated goblin green, and we're going to pull this across the rest of this. And this is where that that grayscale highlight that we put in is really going to work for us, because I don't have to do a lot of work to determine, you know, where my shadows are, where my highlights are. It's mostly going to be done for me here. And because we're applying such a small amount of paint, this does not obliterate that. If you went on thick and heavy here, you would find that you are obliterating your previous layers, and so then you are effectively wasting your time just because you're not seeing it. You're not getting the good benefits that you're hoping to from it. And this part is the part that's going to receive the most layers, so I'm a little less concerned about this being perfectly covered in green, this desaturated green. I do still want it there, don't get me wrong, but it's going to receive quite a bit more paint at the top than it is on the bottom. So I really wanted to make sure that bottom area had exactly what it needed. Also, if I put less of this on here, when I go for the next colors, those next colors will then have a little bit brighter underpainting to make them show up a little bit better. Alright, and now looking at the two of these, you can really tell the difference, the one that has the green undercoat and the one that doesn't. I'm going to get a little more paint. Again, part of the issue with this technique is that it uses quite a bit of paint. Quite a bit of paint. More so than almost any other technique that's not like a spiral graph or something. We're going to desaturate this down, just like last time. Alright, grab a little more of the black. Squeeze that paint out here on the side. And I'm not going to even wash this out this time, just because I am using quite a bit of paint. We're going to come in here, this desaturated green. There we go. So to make sure I get it all the way to the bottom here. There we go. All the way to the bottom. And then bring it back up. Same thing here. I'm going to make sure I get it in there because there's going to be a lot less other colors. Come in here too, right at the top. And what I'm really doing is I'm just going over these areas and trying to get a consistent green, because this isn't, it is part of the highlight, part of the volume we're going to be adding to it, but I do want it to look very consistent across the whole stone, because this is going to be our base of it. All right. And now this side has our green on it, and we're going to pull the green to the other side. So exact same technique. Very slowly building up our layers here. This should be subtle at first, and then as we add more and more layers, it should start to really pop out. I'm going to add just a very, very small touch of water here. Not a lot, just a touch. There we go. I feel like I am drying out on the brush really, really quickly. Gonna test this on the back of our thumb. All right, there we go. So we do want it to appear on the model, but not in any great amount. Hit that bottom area right there too. Alright, this is where I'm being very, very careful. I do want this paint on the stone. I do not want it on the steel. If I can help it, I don't want to have to repaint this steel. And so I'm going to go all the way to the edge, but without getting the paint on it. And then this will make a really nice contrasting color, because these things are so close together that you'll really be able to see the difference between the two, because you'll have them close to compare to. It's another one of kind of the secrets of making minis that pop, is when you have colors that are really close to each other like this, it really highlights the difference in the two colors. Alright, and you can see me going back over to the other one every now and then. Just as the paint dries, you can see kind of where it ended up exactly. And so I do go back and I touch it up just a tad wherever I see that. And I'm even, in this case, pushing back against the brush. Not a great technique for your brush, but it does get the paint where you want it, not where you don't want it, because the object itself stops you. Alright. I do see here that this doesn't quite have the amount that I want, so I'm going to come in here a little more. I'm very careful not to touch the steel portion here. Alright. So still coming up. Same technique. We're just going to push towards it like that. Again, that's very bad for your brush, but I'm not sure I can really make this brush all that much worse. So I'm not too worried about this one, but you got a $60 brush from, you know, Artist Opus, or you're working with some of the other brands of brushes that are nice and fancy, probably don't want to do that. Actually hit the bottoms here. There we go. And now we're going to do these backside. You can see the difference in the two, the green without the green. Which is good. We're almost out of this paint on our palette, so we're probably going to get it just perfect here. Almost at this point, we've moved from a dry brush to a very, very light glaze. Just because that seemed to do a little better as I was going. Alright, so we have that nice desaturated green in here. Now, we're going to add a little bit more green and put a layer in that's less desaturated. These are some of the highlight portions of the model, or at least I think so. They will be for this model. So I am just taking some extra time with these particular spots and making sure that they have the effect I want on them. You might decide that, you know, this part of the throne I don't care so much for. I'm not going to spend as much time on it, and that's totally valid. For me, though, the Silent King is such an interesting figure, and so are his two minions, that they will undoubtedly be the thing at the center of this model. You'll see that. But I do also want some additional interest in the throne itself. And by taking my time here, by building up these layers, and that was a little too much paint, so we're going to sit here for a moment and just blend it right there at the transition. And that should take care of that. Come in here, and I'm trying to focus kind of on the upper area there. Getting this less desaturated version of the paint. So it's going to appear a bit more green here. Maybe even just a touch of that over here, just to imply that green a little more. There we go. Alright, so now we're already working to create some visual interest here on these stones. This isn't really a lighting effect so much as it is just trying to create some visual interest with the kind of hues that are inherent to the stone. Bringing some more of the green across, just increasing the saturation, because it is desaturated from all of the black that we added. But that's okay. That's going to add a lot of depth to it, and I'm essentially going over the whole thing here with a slightly less desaturated version. And again, this is not something you have to do to this extent. I'm going to probably do something like the 7 layers I did on the other one. You don't have to do that. You could decide that, you know, 3 layers is good, or 2 layers. It really just depends on the effect and how subtle you want it to be, and how well blended you want it to be. The more layers, the better the blend. And so it'll almost, at a certain point, look like you pulled out an airbrush on it. Which I think for many people, having those really nice, silky, smooth blends is really what they're going for in many ways. Alright, and so we've put all of the different layers of Goblin Green on that we're going to put on, and now we're going to move on to our Wizard Orb. This is a green that has a bit of blue in it. And so we're going to come in here with this, add some of that to our palette. I am not going to desaturate this at all. I could if I wanted to do 2 more layers of just this, but we're going to come in with the Wizard Orb. I'm going to move these little bits of stuff off of this. You can see some of these little bits of dried paint are on here. I'm going to make sure that doesn't get picked up by my brush, because that would be bad. Alright, going to get most of this off. And I'm going to really focus this paint starting on this upper area. I'm going to add just a little bit here to these bottoms, but I'm going to leave all of that alone down there. And so we're going to pull this paint up here. You can see I'm just doing it the same on both sides here. And let me get this back into the frame. There we go. Pull just a hair over here on that side, just a hair on this side, and really focus it on this top part. And then the next paint's not going to be on the bottom at all. And you can see I've really avoided these steel areas here, so they're really popping out. You have something to compare and contrast the rest of this model against where we're at right now. And that's going to really make quite a big difference in how it's perceived. Just because you do have something so close to it here. And that's just being really careful not to get this color on the rest of the model. I am bringing this right down to the edge, and this is starting to highlight that edge up too. You can see it's starting to bring the edge out because this is a brighter paint. And so far I am going just mostly for convenience sake, because I'm kind of worried I'm going to end up popping these things off the model. They're pretty well attached, honestly. Looks like they have 2 big connection points each, but they are on these kind of flimsy like hoses, and I am worried about that. But here's where in the next step it's going to start mattering the direction of my brush, and so because of that I'm going to have to hold it in a little less ideal way. I am just bringing this color right down. Yep, same thing there. Alright, now you can see we're really starting to get this kind of green-blue effect here. Can't forget the tops. So we'll come into the tops of these. And this is where you also have to be real careful. If you start pulling on these in weird ways, start touching them, you will get tearing. And we don't want tearing. Alright. So we've gotten the paint on those, same as the other. I am going to wash my brush out now. It's gotten quite dry. And now we're going to go ahead and pull some of this blue. Alright. Now the direction I was pulling this, it does matter, don't get me wrong. But it matters slightly less because the highlights I put in were pulled from the correct direction, from the top down. These aren't really generating a light source, and so we're respecting the light source that is above the model and slightly in front. Alright, let's check this here. Alright, so we're going to grab some of our blue. We're going to be careful because we do want this to be a nice even transition here. So this is one I am going to test. That's a little much. Alright, that's a little better. And this is really just going to be on the top of this model, but now what we're going to have to do is pull from the top down because it will start to be noticeable when I'm pulling from a different direction, because you can see it's just catching the tops here. I can every now and then see a little fleck come off. I think that is actually the brush breaking down, which, you know, doesn't bode well for not being that far into the model and having pieces of the brush come off. But that is what we're going to be dealing with apparently in the future. I'm going to come in here from the top down and do the same thing. Alright. And now we have a really beautiful volumetric highlight across this. I'm just going to grab these and get the tops of these done too. I'm just supporting it. I'm doing a circular motion on that. There we are. That's pretty nice. You can see that black stone, and it matches pretty closely what we have going on here with the blues and greens transitioning up and out. There's not really a light source coming from the bottom here. There will be from this side though, and that's one we're going to have to work on in just a second, because this guy right here is going to generate quite a bit of light. He is seemingly powering this whole chair. But before we come back in with those, we're going to put the generic highlight that we had put on the rest of it, which for that, we're going to come back to our arid earth. This is our Army Painter Arid Earth. We're just going to get this back on the palette. I'm going to avoid this older paint here just in case it's formed a skin, because it'll pick the skin up and then it'll lay like a sliver of skin onto my model, and that'll be bad. We don't want that. We're going to be imagining, though, this light source. I'm not going to paint him white yet, which is what we're going to start with, and we'll do the OSL around the whole thing after that. But these are really far out. It's very easy to get to them right now. The rest of this model is actually designed really, really well. Even when I have things that are really deep into the model, I can still get my brush on them. Even using a brush like this, I can still get in there. And a lot of this is actually going to be steel. And so we're going to have most of this be a steel color, just like this. And then we are going to bring attention to the Silent King and his two minions by making them gold and brass colored. And so that will really be a juxtaposition of colors there, two things between warm and cold. All right, you can see now this is totally dried. It's all saturated out. And we're going to go ahead and put our pretty subtle highlights on this. We got to be very, very careful with this because this could easily obliterate all the good work we've done. So I'm going to come in here and just testing it on my thumb here. You can see we're getting kind of a rainbow thumb going on. All right. Okay, that's leaving just enough. These are going to come from the top down. And I'm going to be very careful how I do these. I'm going to start at the top. Oh, I'm going to bang the camera. So now we're going to pull this down here. We're going to pull it down on every side, just very subtle here. Really trying to hit this edge here with kind of the edge of this brush, although it's very difficult to do. I am going to bring this into here on this edge because I do want those edges really just barely highlighted there, just so that the eye can see them. Otherwise, it's very easy to miss with this very dark model. It's very easy to miss like where these shapes kind of begin and end, and that's not what I want. I want it to be very clear where these shapes begin and end. And so just looking at the two, you can see here one side has that highlight. It's very, very clear where everything begins and ends. The other one less so. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to grab some more paint. We're going to get almost all of it out. And then we're going to test it on our thumb again, because it's really touchy here. If we too much paint here can make us have to redo everything. That's not what I had in mind today. All right, same thing from the top to the bottom. Very subtle strokes. Catching just the tops here. And again, trying to catch kind of the edge of the model with the edge of the brush. It's really difficult with a brush like this, but it is possible. The direction I am going is important. Come back to the other one here, and we're going to come back in here to get some of that nice highlight on that. And we're going to try and do the same thing here. Catch the edge, just the edge. Do that so you can see. And the same thing here. Going to catch the edge here. Same thing on the bottom. Very nice and subtle. Nothing crazy. There we are. Yeah, and here we go. Just picking out anything else I want. So we are going to come back, and on this back side, we will create another OSL effect, and it's going to be from this big glowing Satan, or Catan, or however you'd like to pronounce it, that's stuck in the middle here. And the way we're going to paint him, and the way we're going to paint all the glowing orbs, including the lightning on the bottom of the model, is exactly the same. as we had done with the other lightning here. A mostly steel throne with some blackstone highlights. There's a little hair right there. But there we are. And on these, I'm not going to pull in the white yet. After we paint him up and I know exactly where everything is going to be that's going to be that glowing color, then I can kind of work from there. But guessing where that's going to be is not the best of ideas. So there we are. You can see that highlight goes all the way around. I'm going to wash my brush out here, and we're going to talk about what is next. So, the next thing for this whole big dealio is to decide which pieces here are going to be the steel color and which pieces might be brass. So we're going to take a look at our reference model. It does look like, looking at the reference model, and there's nothing saying we have to follow it exactly, but I'm going to be following it very closely, especially because I do want to bring attention to the Silent King here by making him the brass. So it looks like, yes, so the entire thing here is actually going to be kind of a steel color of sorts. And then so it's going to be, yeah, there's not going to be much color in that at all. It looks like there are a few small pieces. The symbol of the Triarch, which is at these pieces here, these look like they're made of a little bit lighter color of kind of a brass color. And then the three guys are going to be done in mostly gold. Yeah. So I think that's going to be the plan, is to make a few of these small bits and pieces will be a brass, and then the guys will be gold. So brass for the throne, steel for the throne, golden for the people that are on the throne. I feel like we'll have a few points of interest here on the model, but also we'll make sure to have the main focus remain on our three characters that are on it. Cool. All right, so this was kind of an impromptu one here. I just wanted to finish up the Blackstone. The next time I'm here, we're going to go ahead and dry brush this entire thing. The rest of it's going to be the steel that'll be around the whole thing. And we'll go ahead and set our base for anything that's going to be brass on this. So this entire thing is going to get brushed all the way, just like these areas right here. But now we're done, for the most part, with our Blackstone, with only one small piece that's on it. And we're completely done with our Menhirs, which is great. So the next stream will be Monday at 10 a.m. I look forward to seeing you there. Have a great day.